Yat has been introduced already, so I'm actually just like to ask him 3 questions, and then hopefully, and have you then ask. But the first question goes here to all of us, and it's a typical question, you know, who has owned or owned crypto in some way, you know, in this audience? Who? And who doesn't? That's the rest, right? Okay. So Yat, okay. You have a task here right now. You have an opportunity to change something. And the big topic today is tokenization and its concept. But before we jump into that, you founded, of course, Animoca many years ago as a gaming, Steffi said, as a gaming and Web3 company. Tell us, what is Animoca today, right? You know, what problem are you solving? What system you're building? Give us a view on Animoca, and also why this year is very important.
Yeah, I mean, just very briefly, Animoca today, I mean, we're a Hong Kong headquartered company, but today we have over $2 billion worth of assets. We are one of the largest, if not the largest investor in Web3 and crypto. Over the last 5-6 years, we've done over 600 investments. Today we have 628 portfolio companies. And I see blockchain and crypto and tokenization a little bit like the advent of the internet back in sort of late 90s and early 2000s. And so the vision of Animoca Brands is essentially sort of bringing that future where we can actually have true digital property rights. Today, most of you are using the internet, but you don't own a piece of it. You're all actually digital serfs. You're creating data, you're creating information, but it belongs to the platform. And that platform makes literally billions of dollars off you. And that value ought to be shared by the users in the community. That is the original internet was supposed to be like, when we had more decentralized information. We came into a centralized state. Think of Apple, think of Facebook, think of Google, even TikTok. Right? These are all entities that own all of our data. They should be sharing that. They should be sharing value. That's what Web3 means. And that's our mission, right? And just to give you by the numbers, that market today is about $3 trillion. So it's not small. In the state of assets, it's still relatively small. It's, you know, obviously hundreds of trillions of dollars out there, but $3 trillion. Bitcoin today is only second to gold in terms of the commodities market. If you were to look at the top 10 companies in the world, Bitcoin itself would probably be number 4 or number 5, depending on the market day. I think the other reason, and we can talk about this later, is why perhaps in the West, you know, people don't see it as much as they see it in the East, is because the problem that crypto is solving is much more apparent in places like Africa, Southeast Asia, South America. You have stable currencies, you have relatively stable governments, depending where you look at, right? But in these other places, they didn't have that. And so blockchain solved that problem initially. And so payments basically, you know, Paolo was speaking yesterday on Tether. How do you get to 500 million users, right? It's just a US dollar. Well, you're used to this idea that when I send money or your payroll, you can wait for 30 days to get your next payroll. You've got systems around that. But if you're in a country like the Philippines, you live day by day. Why should your paycheck be paid monthly? Why shouldn't it be paid daily? But the systems don't work this way in traditional finance. But with blockchain technology, you don't need a bank account. You basically can just deliver money instantly at a fraction of a cost. And essentially, that basically removes the intermediary. Right? And just a final thought. You know, what the internet did was it basically created mass sort of distribution and access to information. It made information a commodity, broadly speaking. And what blockchain and tokenization does, it does the same for value and distribution of value. That's why people talk about democratization of value, because basically of blockchain.
Absolutely. You already mentioned that, and talk about what is tokenization, right? You know, I'd like to ask you then what is tokenization.
Yes, sure.
But I also think you mentioned already it's a concept, of course, of freedom and ownership, but it's also concrete advantage, benefit to companies now, right? You know, that can deploy and apply that. So maybe
I'll give you
explain to us a few examples, right? Why it's relevant, why it's beneficial.
In a very simple example, let's just take tokenization of something like a stable coin, which is basically just US dollar or any currency. Today, there's about 150 to 200 million people in Africa, Southeast Asia, South America. They do not have a bank account, or most of them don't. They wouldn't have access to the dollar. But now, through a wallet, through stablecoins, they now essentially have a dollar. Now, you could say, that's interesting, except every person here can now do business with that person. They were before unbanked. Normally, to do business, you need a bank account, or you need some way to access. Just the internet isn't enough, right? But through basically blockchain, they now you have reached them. But it also means that that person in Africa or Southeast Asia can now potentially buy tokenized assets. So what is the opportunity? How many people don't get a chance to invest in successful companies or interesting constructs or even commodities? But now, essentially, when you tokenize it, it becomes accessible to everyone around the world. The way that we like to describe crypto and tokenization is it's the asset class of the youth. In South Korea, we just had a panel on South Korea, right? 60% of the youth under the age of 30 exclusively trade crypto. They don't even bother with the stock market. So what happens is that companies who basically have stocks are now thinking about how do I tokenize my stocks so that I'm able to basically sort of address that market. But why does it matter? Because when you build something on blockchain, it becomes open. And when it becomes open, you can compose and build on top of it. So in other words, let's say you have a share and you tokenize your share. Well, right now, think about it. If I have to make a voting, I have to go and, we as a public company, we have this voting system. It takes 27 days. You have to send out an email. You tell everyone to vote on something. I have to prove that you own it. You can do this seconds, instantly. So it's much, much more faster, right? It also means I don't have to care which country you're in. You can be all over the world, just from an access standpoint. So you reach larger markets, you reach more distribution. And if you are not tokenizing, your competitor who is going to tokenize is going to basically beat you in business, just the same way that the competitor who went on the internet and you did not, basically you lost out to that competitor. And to give you an idea, between the perpetuals and the spot trading, it's almost $200 to $300 billion a day, right? So that is the size of the current market. So if you have commodities and you were tokenizing it, you can now collateralize it. So if you're a business, that's basically capital that you could use, which was locked as well, right? That's kind of one of the other areas.
Right. And so you see this also for here, right? For Europe, for West companies here, relevant and interesting.
It's absolutely relevant. I mean, first of all, who doesn't want more customers, right? Who doesn't want to reach out more to basic distribution? But also here in Europe, you're sitting on a lot of assets, right? Whether it's commodities, whether it's stocks, whether it's, basically sort of private companies, right? If you were to tokenize that, you can reach new markets and you can expand upon them. Think about the stock market. Right now, if you listed a company on the stock exchange, you're actually kind of restricted to that particular market, whether it's the Frankfurter Börse or whether it is, NASDAQ, or it doesn't really matter, right? But if you put this on the blockchain, every customer around the world, basically who has a wallet, can become your customer as well, right? And if you think about it this way, today there's about 500 million people who own crypto, and the projection is going to be 1 billion people very soon. Just like the speed of the internet, you're going to have basically 2-3 billion people in the world owning this asset. You need to be able to tap this. The other thing is, when you talk about AI, what is the asset class of AI? Everyone talks about agentic AI, but an AI does not have the ability to have a bank account, right? They're not going to KYC, AML, they're not going to have a PayPal account, but they can have a wallet and essentially access a stablecoin or crypto. So AI agents are going to be trading and buying stuff from each other and from you and whatever, 24/7. And that's going to be through tokens.
So it's interesting. You say the AI economy, basically, the agent economy is driven by tokens. Right?
I mean, the way you can think of tokens, in the current AI economy, it's already the digital equivalent of the AI commodity. You have to buy tokens to power the AI. It's a representation of essentially energy and compute. But that commodity is currently locked in a closed ecosystem. But if you opened it up and tokenized it, you create a market for it. And if it wasn't for the markets in commodities like gold and silver and lithium and all that kind of stuff, then the chip market and the manufacturing industry would also not have the scale and size that it has today. And then just think, just project into the future. Do you think the future will be more digital or less digital? I think the answer is pretty clear, which basically means that more digital commodities will be more valuable, which is essentially the prospect of tokenization in crypto.
Interesting. You're on your way to Davos, right, to the WEF many years, and you have a significant presence this year. We spoke earlier, right, about that. And Davos, of course, is always about geopolitics also, right? Yes. It's about, not company level only, but, world level. So if you look to tokenization from that angle, and we had Paolo Arduino yesterday, and the sheer size that Tether is now the 17th largest holder of US Treasury, right?
Yes.
And soon maybe it's a top 10. And yeah. 70th largest holder of Treasury. It's a company that didn't exist in that form 10 years ago, right?
And the CEO was yesterday here. Nobody was here in the
Yes.
Okay.
And Sheffi, you're right. So 100%. In 3-5 years, when we'll say, Yat, Paolo Arduino, here, right? And what I want to say is, if you look to this geopolitical level, right? Yeah, what would you say, you know, how does this play out, right?
Yeah.
Asia is very front, America is now really front.
So when you look at, you know, this year, last couple of years, you know, even though there are a lot of side events in Davos around crypto, normally crypto didn't have much of a center stage. This year, I'm on 3 panels in Congress at Davos that talk about tokenization in crypto. So one on stablecoins, one on sort of de-extinction, and another one on tokenization broadly, which tells you a little bit, you know, where the future is going if it becomes basically a topic at WEF. Yeah. Now, why is that? US in particular, because of Trump, basically America has shifted from very anti-crypto to incredibly positive crypto. You've probably heard some stuff about the Clarity Act, some drama around that. But the main point is that America wants to be a leader in blockchain. What that means is that when the Clarity Act does pass eventually, is that major US companies are all going to begin tokenizing. And when they tokenize, they have an asset that they want to trade with. So you at the other counterparty, whether you're Asian or European, if you want to do business with a US counterparty that has a token, how do you do that? If you don't have the regulation or you don't have the infrastructure, you can't do business with them. And, you know, I guess I'm a little older for some. I remember the day when I was in Hong Kong, and the reason why I set up an ISP, and the reason why people did business with me in Hong Kong to set up email was not because they wanted email. It was because the American business partner says, you need email so I can do business with you. And this is true for fax machine, telefax, internet, doesn't really matter. And the same is true for tokenization. Now, the geopolitics, stablecoins. Yes, Tether was, I mean, not just 17th largest. They actually were, I think, top 7 or 8 buyer of essentially US treasuries last year, collectively. Think about who's the buyer of US treasury. China, Japan, they're all selling US dollars, right? So you make a stablecoin, they're the ones who are buying it. So that's why the Genius Act is important. But also, think about dollar hegemony. As I shared earlier, 150 to 200 million people around the world who are not actually a dollar economy are now in a dollarized economy. Whether it's Nigeria, whether it's Pakistan, they're now using US dollars. Now think about that from a national perspective. It's kind of dangerous as well, because essentially they're dollar colonizing these places. And of course, the US dollar, how do they make money? They print the dollar, right? And every time they print the dollar, they're not just taxing Americans, they now tax the world, because they all have more dollars. So the distribution of a stablecoin is incredibly politically important. And so the rest of the markets, whether it's Europe, which is a little behind, but certainly Asia is responding to that because they recognize that essentially they're becoming dollar colonized otherwise, right? That's just one example. But also, broadly speaking, where's the youth going, right? And looking what the youth is doing is a good indicator to the future. It doesn't matter if it's social media, if it's gaming, or if it's blockchain and tokenization. And they're the ones who are using this asset class, so you have to be ready for that. But stablecoins is a highly political topic because of that reason. And I do think that Europe is sleeping a little bit on the wheel. You do have MiCA with MiCA, and you've got essentially an EU regulation, but you don't have a stablecoin giant here. And so imagine what happens if everyone here in Europe is now starting to use a US dollar stablecoin. Eventually, there's a question mark as to why you even need the euro. And some countries like Argentina are like, we give up, it's fine. But that's not very suitable here for Europe, right? And so that's kind of what's happening. And you don't have to look very far. From Asia, looking in, I think Europe is already tech colonized. Facebook, Apple, Google, Microsoft, they own Europe. I mean, you don't really have a European counterpart, unlike what we have maybe in Korea or in China elsewhere. We have at least ways in which we can fend that off. The ability, yes, you can put regulation, you can put fines. I mean, the drama that you're seeing on X with Elon Musk, but still, right? I mean, you don't have an answer. You still are using it. And the risk is that if you don't embrace blockchain and crypto, the same will happen with your financial system.
Well, so this is highly relevant. Thank you. I also think that's why DLD is important, that you clearly message, right, to policymakers, to business leaders, why this is important. We have 1 minute left. One question. Is there a question someone would like to ask? One question. Antoine.
Well, I think the challenge with Europe, and I'm not super familiar with it, but I think the issue is around CBDC versus a stablecoin. And the problem is that nobody wants a CBDC. So the reason is it's all about sovereignty, right? I mean, do you want to have money in your bank account that someone can just take away? That's the big issue, right? A stablecoin is your property. The same way why blockchain and crypto became big is because Bitcoin was supposed to be a hedge against essentially QE, right? The betrayal of money that happened after essentially the sort of Lehman crisis, where essentially printing happened and inflation happened, and essentially this entire disparity was created, right? And so that's why stablecoins ultimately, we think, are going to win, because people want to have sovereignty of their money and their assets.
Okay, time is up. Next,
thank you.
Exciting panel is coming, Steffi, right? So thank you, Yat, and have a good rest of the day.